is really a great honor to be here, to be able to open this conference, and also to be able to discuss and reflect on such an important topic these days, which would be the relationship between think tanks and their communities. I do think that it was a great idea for think tanks to take the initiative to shed light on the different roles that think tanks have taken throughout the years. To me, it would be quite absurd to think that since the early 20th century, think tanks have remained the same regarding their objectives, their functions, their missions, their activities, and that all of these have remained unchanged. Because that would mean that the think tank model is static. And I have to say that it really isn't. That would actually also mean that the version of myself at 5 years old, and 10, and 15, and 20, and 30, and 35 years old, and 40 and 47, which is where I stand today, is exactly the same. And that really the social and the economic context in which I grew up really didn't affect or shape my development at all. So all of us here are aware of the fact that for decades, think tanks have been able to play a fundamental role in shaping public policies. Traditionally, we've been seen as organizations that conduct analysis, but also generate research and data that have been essential for decision makers. And despite the fact that think tanks around the world vary in terms of their focus and their context, I would say that influencing the public sphere is part of their essence. I would say that that would be the foundational and the traditional role that largely explains our raison d'être, as perhaps the French would say. But also, let's not forget that think tanks are catalysts of change and catalysts of innovation. And that in many regions of the world, we've been able to be resilient and also adapt to different contexts. And when I think about this different context or this new context, I think about three main factors. And so the first one would be perhaps a weakening or a breakdown in the relationship with the public sector. And so the second one would probably be a shift in donor priorities. And the third one would also be just decisions taken by the think tanks. So definitely I would say that this context has led us to think about different ways in which impact can be made and also open new channels of communication with new and with different actors. So as a think tank, if you're in any of these situations, you can't really act as business as usual and just pretend that nothing has changed. And I really wouldn't want to make generalizations because I know that every think tank is different. But for example, I know for a fact that many organizations in the Latin American region have exchanged the communication with the public sector with work with the community. And this could definitely involve all areas of research or just perhaps only some. And so at this point, I would like to pause and reflect about this concept of community. To me, it would be quite inaccurate to conceive the community as a group of people or a homogeneous group of people with the same interests and the same objectives. And within communities, I would say that think tanks mainly relate with civil society organizations and also certain demographic groups that could be like women, for example, or indigenous groups, or the youth. And so in this scenario, we do assume that policy change is possible when we empower the community. So again, considering this scenario where there is a possible change of actors, a question would be like, how can we effectively then engage with our community? So here I would give you like three main advices. So the first one would be, stay away from our sophisticated and very technical language and instead promote a much more simple and didactic communication style. We must make sure that our ideas do resonate outside the circles of specialists. And I have to say that I am convinced that the simplicity in language facilitates understanding and also removes barriers with the community. And let me give you an example of a situation that happened in my country. For example, in 2015, when the National Anti-Corruption System was first established, there were many doubts regarding its operation. So the system is governed by 7 regulatory laws that, to be honest, are quite difficult to understand except for lawyers. So at Ethos, we were interested in promoting citizen participation. However, we did realize that nobody would voluntarily want to invest part of their time to sit and trying to decipher this really complex normative framework around the national anti-corruption system. So what happened next? At Ethos, we decided to publish an anti-corruption booklet. At that moment, the libro vaquero, or the cowboy book, held a really special place in the Mexican pop culture. Actually, it was the most widely read publication in the whole country, and it reached rural and also urban areas. So by making an alliance with the editors, we were able to introduce a new chapter to the story in order to explain the basic concepts of the system. And we were also able to answer some fundamental questions, such as what is the importance of the system, what is the objective, how can citizens participate? And I have to say that we also, or the initiative also aimed at fostering a culture of legality. So the comic book was actually quite successful, and we ended up printing many more copies. So actually, I brought a copy here with me. So if you want to take a look at it. So this is like the additional copy that we did at Ethos, but you could actually buy the original story in the stalls in the streets where you would sell magazines and also newspapers. And so this one would come with the original one for free. So if you want to just pass it around to see what the cowboy book looked like. So let me go on to my second advice. So that would be to reassess the power of collaboration. And when think tanks find it useful, I think that we should do alliances with, like I said, other organizations. And this can perhaps translate into building networks at a subnational level, as has been our case. It may increase the likelihood for policy change. And so for this purpose, in 2019 at Ethos, we created 2 collectives of organizations. And so the first one was called, or is called, the Anti-Corruption Citizen Force. And the second one is called Suitable Profiles Now. So together, both collectives add to more than 30 civil society organizations across the whole country. So in general terms, their purpose or the objective of these organizations or of these collectives is to highlight the deficiencies in both the design but also the implementation of the national anti-corruption system. Also, with these collectives, we want to generate pressure for the appropriate appointments of key or strategic positions within the national system. So let me tell you that with the support of both of these collectives, we were able to push back on a presidential decree that aimed at eliminating one of the key institutions within the national anti-corruption system. So my third advice would be so that in order to improve the relationship with the community, it is very important to adapt the information so that it can be understood by certain demographic groups. Let me tell you that at Ethos, for example, we have worked with indigenous population in the anti-corruption topic. we know for a fact that in order to mitigate corruption, it is important to include the entire population. We need the support of the entire population. However, we need to be aware of the fact that there are certain demographic groups that face certain disparities and challenges when trying to access knowledge and also information. For example, how could indigenous groups participate in a system such as the National Anti-Corruption System when the information is only published in Spanish or through electronic means, which are sometimes not even accessible to them? So let me tell you that a few years ago, we worked with Quintiltic. And so Quintiltic is a civil society organization in the state of Chiapas. This would be one of the poorest states in Mexico. And we wanted to make a diagnosis on how corruption affects indigenous communities. And as a result, we created a communications and awareness campaigns where we published different materials. And I have to say that we published these materials such as videos and infographics and many others in 6 indigenous languages. And we also emphasized the importance of access to culturally relevant information. I have to say that I do believe that little by little, the democratization of knowledge will become an objective for every think tank. And this would mean not only publishing our policy papers or our publications, but making sure that the material is understood and is also useful for everyone. So next, I'd like to share with you the type of support that we as think tanks can provide to the community. And I have to say that as a first step, we need to realize that the community holds very valuable knowledge and also experiences that can be integrated into the design and the implementation of public policies. So think tanks are also beginning to recognize that change is also possible when we embrace our role as facilitators and also as collaborators. I have to say that think tanks have the ability to be effective partners to communities in order to complement the empirical knowledge of these local actors with the rigorous methods and strategies that we have in order to generate impact. Our research and analysis expertise allows us to offer an evidence-based approach to the challenges that are faced by these communities. And secondly, think tanks have the opportunity to help strengthen the community's learning processes. We can help them to better articulate their needs, to identify effective solutions, and also advocate for changes. And if this is something that interests them, we can also help them strengthen their capacity to interact with local authorities. In order to ensure that their voices are heard in the decision-making process. And in this regard, think tanks can also play a crucial role in coordinating different actors in order to ensure a more efficient but also greater sustainability of the interventions. And I would also like to address another of the questions that is guiding this conference. And that would be, how can think tanks build trust with the communities? And in response, I'd like to say that transparency and clarity is crucial. We must explain in a very simple way what is the purpose of our work. And we should also explain what would be the timeline, like who would be the participating actors. A very important thing is to make sure that we explain whether there will be funding involved and also what would be the expected results. Similarly, we also have to be very open to answer any questions that the members of the community may have. And it is also important to consider that perhaps other organizations might have tried to work in that community or other think tanks as well. And so if that relationship did not yield the expected result, there might be some distrust in the community towards external actors. In our experience, it's also very important to be flexible and to be adapt. Every hour that a person gives you, perhaps in an interview or in a training session, this is time that they could be spending in any other activity that could be giving them like an income. And we must take into consideration the social dynamics and try to adapt in order to facilitate an active participation. In this context, it is also very important to take into consideration the double or triple workload that sometimes women have. So finally, I want to emphasize that I know for a fact that some think tanks are already deeply immersed in this process of change. However, others may still maintain their traditional roles and perhaps haven't even considered any shift in direction in the near future. So if you, as a think tank, find yourself in this situation, I just have to say that it is perfectly acceptable. However, I think it's very important for us to know what the 2024 landscape may look like for some of the think tanks that are sitting in this conference. And for now, I think that the main idea I would like to put on the table would be that the work with the community should not be seen as a deviation, but rather as a natural expansion of our work. So I think that I would end my intervention here. And so if there are any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them.
Can everybody, oh, yep, it's working perfectly fine. Well, thank you so much, Liliana. That was wonderful. A lot of what you said really resonated with me, and I'm sure with a lot of people here. We have a couple of minutes, so let's take maybe about, I would say 10 minutes or so. If you have any questions, I see hands are already eagerly being raised, but also if you want to reflect on what Liliana said, if you agree, disagree, we can take some time now, and I think my colleagues Rachel and Paula will be on mics to help me out. So who would like to start the conversation? We have one here. Anybody else? Okay, so we will start with the gentleman here, Catalina, soon afterwards.
Thank you. I'm Kedar from Nepal Policy Institute. Thank you, Liliana. It's a good presentation. I don't think we could disagree with you. But I have a question. As you said, as we evolve into a situation, but 20th century, when you said, please educate me if I'm wrong, those days, I don't think we have think tanks in many parts of the world. It was NGOs and civil societies. And most of the NGOs and civil societies are involved in activism to influence taking the issues of the communities. And you are right. Now, after the globalization and the information technology, now we are connected all over the world. And we are learning new ways of doing things because now we can communicate like here, we are sharing the ideas. So if we want only to work with communities, communities don't make public policies. Public policies are made by those who are in the power and authorities. How do you work with them? How do you involve them? Without involving them, how do you implement the program? We may come up with a fantastic program and projects and ideas, but policymakers will say, sorry guys, we don't accept this. So shouldn't we also think of involving them in one way or other so that, because it's a complex society now, every society is different, no? And now, as we have seen globally, the policymakers are very much politicized in their own thinking, they have their own interests. And many cases, communities' interests are not taken care. Meaning, we as a policy think tanks, we should be thinking through community to public policy implementation, whatever we call it anyway. So what is your recommendation? How do we work so that we become successful? We don't become activists also again, because in 20th century early, we are only NGOs, as I said. And then it was always confrontation in many cases because we issue diversity, inclusiveness, we bring this, never existed. So in order to advance those agendas now, can you advise us from your experience? What do you think? That's my question. As a think tank, I thought we should have a kind of complementary service and advisory influencing body rather than still continuing the activism. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that question. Liliana, would you like to respond now, or would you like to take a couple more questions?
I think I can respond one by one. Thank you. Thank you for your comment and question. If I'm not wrong, and maybe Enrique can correct me, I think that the first think tanks in the US were born in the early 20th century. So as we know, this is a concept that originated in the US. So when I did my research, you're right, it is only think tanks in the US, but then little by little, this think tank model started like arising in other parts of the world. So, and you're also right when you say that communities don't really make public policies. But I do think that, like I said, this is a different model that we're speaking about, not the traditional model when we as think tanks, we were doing our own research, and then we were having this conversation with decision makers and the public sector, and then our recommendations were taken into consideration and were transformed into public policies, right? That was like our traditional way to go. So I think that now we're looking into new and different like channels. And what I do believe is very like enriching is the fact that now we can work with the communities and absorb their knowledge and absorb their experiences, and then actually nourish our public policy recommendations with that knowledge that we obtained from working with the community. But you're totally right when you say that we are not activists, and this is not something that as think tanks we want to do. But we do want to open channels of communication with other actors in order to be able to generate a public policy change. That would be the case.
Thanks, Liliana. We had a couple of questions. Maybe we'll go to Kathleen first, and then Sonia and Anthea. Could you also please introduce your names and the organization that you're from, just so that everybody becomes familiar with each other? Thanks very much.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Kathleen van Hoven from ECDPM in Brussels. And I hear you when you say it's a two-way process. So you explain some public policy to the communities and you enrich your analysis with the knowledge. So it's a two-way process. It's a very basic question, and I think it doesn't apply for all the think tanks, of course, that it's very much a national institute I think you're working for. But who pays for that really important, relevant work? I think we used to do that at the time. We made a Cotonou info kit, which we thought was very important to bring the Cotonou agreement to everybody, and we spent an awful lot of time in trying to make it as readable and acceptable as possible. But we did that at the time when we had our own funding, and we had, I think the funding context has changed quite considerable. And so those kind of processes, actually what you're talking about, are quite time-consuming and quite an investment, which I think is very valuable, but I'm just wondering who pays for those.
Yeah, and what an important question. Let me tell you that in the case of Ethos, we didn't really, and we're still in this process, in like working with the community. And I have to say that we're not doing it in every one of our research areas. For example, we're doing this in our sustainable development and inclusion and area. But if I tell you, are you working with the community in your public finance area? I will tell you definitely no. We're not doing it. Actually, I know for a fact that some think tanks, for example, are working in like participatory budgeting. We are not. Right? But this is a way in which you can work with the community in a public finance area. We're not doing that. But I have to tell you that this work with the community was not an initiative that Ethos took on its own. Actually, we started doing this work because the donors starting to ask for this kind of work. And this, if you're wondering what kind of funders, this would be like Tinker Foundation and Ford Foundation. And let me tell you about our transitioning into this different kind of work. I would say that it started back in 2016, actually, when our national anti-corruption system was a year after it was established. But there was like a call for proposal in USA, and some of the deliverables were things that we had not done before at all. Like, for example, we started organizing hackathons. So the first time we had to organize a hackathon, and we were like, how do we do this? We're all like researchers, like we're not like used to doing these kinds of activities. For example, we also had to do like a web page that was targeted at other civil society organizations that wanted to learn about the system in a very simple and didactic and creative way. So little by little, it has been the funders, we're not doing this with our own resources. It has been the funders that have pushed Ethos into working differently. So like I said, I don't want to make generalizations because you know that funders fund different things in every part of the world and different topics and different like deliverables are asked from the think tanks. But I do have to say that this like change in the type of work that we're doing was not an Ethos initiative. This was definitely something that came from the donors and from the donor priorities.
Oh, thank you so much. I think that both questions really raise a valid point, right? First is, should we be doing this? Secondly, can we? Do we have the capacity? Do we have the funding to engage in this? So thank you for that response. I think we'll go to Sonia next.
Hi, I'm Sonia, independent consultant, regular trainer at the Think Tank School, a former leader of a think tank. I have two quick questions on how. One is, how do you manage expectations of communities? Because that's one of the issues in the work I've been engaged with, that when you explore corruption, people want to follow up. And the second question is, what kind of staff do you attract or prepare for this type of engagement? Do you divide the work between those ready to take off the suit and go to the community and listen, or your researchers get sensitized, and especially if you could speak about facilitation, because I think it's an important skill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very, very important question. It is sometimes difficult to manage expectations. And like, for example, I gave this example of how we worked in the southern state of Mexico, in Chiapas, which is one of the poorest states in the country. So it is sometimes difficult to work with those communities and not give them any funding, right? It's like, am I going to waste my time, or is there going to be any funding involved? So it is quite difficult to manage expectations and to keep like the community interested. So it is definitely a channel. And regarding the second question, I have to say that I do think that it is a different profile in terms of we are regularly like hiring this staff that is more like academic, and these are researchers, and many of them, I mean, are not really looking forward to go out and like travel and go and speak with the communities, and they're like, no, I didn't sign up for this, right? Because this is a think tank. So yes, I have to say that the profile is quite different, and you'll find that there's researchers that are really excited, like mainly I would say the young researchers are quite excited when they know that part of their job will be like traveling and going out of the office, and like having like having to communicate with the with the community. I mean, they come back to the office and they're so excited and they're so motivated, you know, because they did all of this work, which was so different from the usual work that we do at the office. So yes, it's a different profile, but I have to say that people come back like really motivated.
Well, thanks so much, Liliana. I think we have time for perhaps one more question. So I think, Anthea, I saw your hand raised. We'll go to Anthea. I know that there's so many more questions, so probably you can meet Liliana afterwards.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Anthea from the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies in Jakarta, Indonesia. Thanks, Liliana, for the lovely keynote address. So my question is, what happens when the the communities that we plan to engage with disagree on us with our policy positions? It may be that, so is it a question of persuading them to our perspective, or is it a question of maybe we have to reevaluate to really understand what is the problem and why they support something that we are opposed to?
Yes, I'd have to say that, thank you for your question. Actually, it's a difficult one, but basically we're trying to facilitate and collaborate, not like really sort of like dictate to go like one way or the other. And we also need to be very cautious. Like I say, sometimes they're interested in like doing some advocacy, right? I mean, some communities have never thought about doing advocacy, but others are like, this sounds like a good idea. Maybe we want to do this, right? And this is when we like help them, like, oh, maybe we need to strengthen your capacity to interact with the local government because maybe you've never done this, right? And there are like different ways in which you can do this, so we can help you do this. So yes, we try to like walk with them and facilitate, you know, but not really like impose, because then you're at a position where they might just not be interested in working with you, and then there's a problem there, right? So yes, I think that I see our work more as facilitators. That would be the key word or quick key concept.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you, everybody.